Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joined-up. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle or MP3 player. Thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a weekly show featuring interviews with fantastic authors sharing their personal stories on how and why they write. There's hints and tips for aspiring writers and great book reviews from top bloggers. Follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast. Right, cue the cheesy theme tune.
Put down your pen and stop your typing. Grab yourself a drink, 'cause it's Joined Up Writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. Happy New Year! I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 68 and the first of 2018, starting the year with a cracking interview with Bonnie Macbird, who writes new Sherlock Holmes novels. Bonnie's got years of experience as a Hollywood writer and has loads to say about that, writing mystery, and of course we spent a lot of time talking about the world's greatest consulting detective. We've also got another book review from regular book blogger Catherine Sunderland, aka Bibliomaniac. So a quick catch up from me as we begin a new year. I'm trying to shake off the lethargy of Christmas. I spent a lot of it feeling a bit below par with the usual batch of colds and viruses that seem to descend at this time of the year as soon as we stop for a rest. I wasn't nearly productive enough over the Christmas break with only a little work done on my own crime novel, but I did manage to get another chapter of my upcoming collaborative non-fiction project drafted, with another one getting written as soon as I finish recording today's show actually. That's for the book I'm writing with Maria Smith, and we're looking forward to telling you more about that very soon. Other than that, watching telly, I did quite a lot of that over the Christmas break, and I did see a very good BBC drama based on Morecambe & Wise comedy writer Eddie Braben. I know our international listeners won't be able to get hold of it, but if you're listening in early January 2018 and you're based in the UK, I recommend you try to catch it on iPlayer. It's called Eric, Ernie and Me, and really captured the struggle that we sometimes face when writing to a deadline and trying to come up with fresh material week after week after week. Stephen Tompkinson was excellent in it, and I highly recommend it as a way to kickstart your motivation for the new year. Speaking of which, I'd love to hear about your projects and your plans for the coming year, so do get in touch at joinedupwriting.co.uk, or you can tweet me at JUPodcast. Right, let's press on and get to today's guest, American author Bonnie Macbird. Bonnie was born and raised in San Francisco and attended Stanford University, where she earned a BA in music and an MA in film. Her long Hollywood career includes 4 years as a feature film development exec at Universal. She wrote the original screenplay for the movie Tron, and she won 3 Emmy Awards for her documentary writing and producing. She's produced numerous plays and musicals. She's got theatre credits as an actor and director. Art in the Blood, her first novel written in the style of Arthur Conan Doyle and featuring Sherlock Holmes' Dr. John Watson, was published in 2015 by HarperCollins and been released in 14 languages worldwide and to critical acclaim, with her latest, Unquiet Spirits, released just last year. This was a really fun chat, so do enjoy. So, yeah, I really appreciate you coming on, Bonnie. Thanks for joining us. I know that you spend some of your time in America and some of your time over here, and I'm fortunate enough that you're over here at the minute. So that's great. How's things?
Things are wonderful. I love being in London at Christmas time.
Yeah, I suppose that kind of fits in with the kind of, you get an atmosphere for your books as well. Does it help to kind of spend a bit of time here?
It really does help to be here. Both of my books are set in December. The first one in 1888, the second one in 1889, and I don't know, just being here in London in December is it's very atmospheric, and I really enjoy it.
Lots of notes and lots of photographs, I should imagine.
Yes, I do a lot of kind of location scouting in a way for both books. The most recent one I went up to Scotland for, and I actually went to places that I thought would be good settings for various parts of the book.
Brilliant. Well, before we kind of dive in, so you've had such a long and varied writing career, and you covered everything from theatre and film and musicals, and obviously more recently novels. I definitely want to talk to you as well about your days as a Hollywood script editor. But before we do that, let's hear about Sherlock Holmes specifically. So how did you come to be such a fan of the character in the first place?
Oh, well, I fell in love with Sherlock Holmes when I was 10, and I first encountered him in the books, really, the original writing. I read A Study in Scarlet first, and then I got so excited I read all of them. And then at the time, they were, of course, airing the Basil Rathbone, Nigel Bruce old movies on TV, old black and white movies. And so I would see those, and I really liked them, although even as a kid, I could tell the difference, when they were the original ones were set in the Victorian era, and then that was too.
They kind of shifted, didn't they, to kind of World War II, wasn't it?
Yeah. They because it became that time, but also because of budgetary constraints, I guess it was much harder to do a period piece, or more expensive, and so they just shifted. And I remember, even as a little kid, I didn't like that shift; it didn't feel right to me. but I mean, Basil Rathbone, of course, was a marvelous Holmes, and then I just, kept falling in love over and over with this character through the years. I mean, through various movie and TV and then I kept returning to read the originals. They really stand up well to read them over and over.
They do. I agree. Yeah, I agree. They don't really date. I mean, they are kind of obviously of a time, but the language isn't particularly archaic. And they still kind of move. They're still quite pacey for considering when they were written, I think.
Exactly. A lot of people have commented on that. He was. Some people have called his writing cinematic, even though, of course, he was writing long before movies. There was an overlap, of course, later. But certainly the original ones were set in the time they took place. They were written at the time they took place, and so. Yes, compared to other writers of his time, he would spend a lot less time kind of waxing poetic about the weather and the scenery, and he would sort of crack on with the story. And so they do have a very distinctly modern pace to them. The language is, by our standards, it's what we would call heightened language. I mean, but it isn't really archaic. There are some expressions, of course, that we don't use anymore. Like we don't use the word ejaculated for.
I knew you were going to say that. Yeah.
Or if we do, it'll stop traffic. So I don't put that in mine, even though he did, because I'm emulating the style. But I also want to respect the modern reader and don't want to have them stop and go, "What the heck?" So, but really, his vocabulary and they're just slightly. It's what we call elevated, I guess, but it's delightful to read, and he used a lot more dialogue than other writers of his time.
Well, I wanted to talk to you. You mentioned there about obviously imitating the style, because, I mean, I'll be completely honest. Until fairly recently, it was my colleague that kind of showed this kind of a genre of writing, I'd guess you'd call it. I was already kind of a big Sherlock Holmes fan, and I'd read Conan Doyle and all that kind of thing, and I wasn't really that aware that there was this whole other genre of fiction where writers such as yourself and Anthony Horowitz and, quite a lot of other authors as well, they'd kind of they'd entered the universe and they'd written new stories. This was kind of new to me. So when you entered into that, and I suppose there's different ways that you could tackle it. Some people modernize it, or they talk about, they take a different perspective or whatever. Why did you choose the approach that you did choose? And how did you find kind of getting into the voice of Dr. Watson and kind of staying true to the originals kind of thing? Well,
that's a very good question. I've enjoyed a lot of different things over the years. As I said, I've been a Sherlock fan for years and years. And for example, I loved the BBC Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman, and that modern take. I loved it. And I thought, it was a wonderful adaptation and so forth. When I sat down to do my own, I've also enjoyed many other things. Laurie King has a wonderful series, where Holmes is a very older man, and it's really centered around a young woman who eventually marries him, actually, and becomes kind of his partner. And so some people take quite a few liberties, and so there are people who write monsters and science fiction combined with Holmes. But when I sat down to decide what I wanted to do, I didn't really think about commercial possibilities. I actually, what I thought was, I want to write the book I want to read. I most want to read, and I love the originals so much. I just want more of them. I wanted more because he only wrote 56 short stories and 4 novellas. And a rather famous writer of something emulating the originals, which is Nicholas Meyer, who did the 7% Solution, which became a movie in the 70s, and he also did some others. He said that I wanted more, and really my impetus was the same. It's just that I wanted more of Conan Doyle. And then I realized, because I'm an artist in other areas, I'm also a musician and I paint, and basically any art form, you learn and grow by emulating or really studying what somebody great does, and in order to copy that style or to emulate the form and the style, you have to learn so much. And so I basically set out to do this for myself, just the book that I wanted to read. And then I thought it would be an incredible artistic challenge to try to do this. And it was. and I like that kind of challenge. As a writer, I like writing to form. I like the constraints of an external form. So, I like writing sonnets. I like writing musicals. Even screenplays, you can say, are really, really very, they're strongly structural and so forth. There's kind of rules that you have to follow. And as a creative person, I really like those constraints. It sort of challenges me to be artistic within these constraints. It's very fun.
I agree. I know what you mean. I even to the extent I'm in a critique group, and each week we do a thing where we have to write a story or whatever, and it's to a prompt, and it's 150 words or it's 100 words or something. And just having that limitation, it often takes you in a different direction that you perhaps wouldn't go usually, because it kind of challenges your conceptions.
Yes, I totally agree. I think in art, it's called freeing constraints, really, and it's a known phenomenon in art. So for example, if you're teaching children to paint or whatever, and you give them 200 colors and a blank piece of paper and no direction, they don't know what to do and they make a mess. And if you say pick 3 colors and do your hand, suddenly beautiful things start happening, because it's these constraints focus you in on just those things, and suddenly when you're dealing with fewer things, so I don't know, just somehow magic happens, and so this freeing constraint thing is definitely in operation. But I started this book not really thinking it was commercial, because I started it in 2011 maybe. I don't know. So I think the Robert Downey Jr. film had just come out, and I think BBC Sherlock was about to come out. And I remember thinking, there's so much stuff out there, nobody's going to want this. It's already, it's kind of saturated. And so I really didn't think of it as a commercial entity. I just wrote the book I wanted to write and wanted to read. And then, so I was very pleasantly surprised when they asked me to do 2 more. So that was I didn't expect that. That's all I can say. So it's been a pleasure to continue on this path, actually.
Yeah, it obviously works really, really well, and so what I liked, at the beginning, I'm sort of part way through Art in the Blood, the first of the novels that you were doing, and I really like the conceit that you give at the beginning. This recent discovery of the story amongst some old medical papers, and I thought that fit really well with the realism of the original stories, because again, that's something that I think people often forget, and I think maybe the modern adaptation that the BBC did that you alluded to recently with Martin Freeman and Benedict Cumberbatch, it kind of showed that it was actually quite realistic for the time as well. Obviously, he was quite keen to try and use, the emerging forensic science was obviously a thing that was just, was kind of creating at the time. So, when did you come up with that idea of the kind of using the conceit?
Well, actually, the American Sherlockians have a thing called playing the game, which this is. In other words, it's the game being that that Holmes and Watson were real, of course, and that these these manuscripts were discovered by his literary agent Arthur Conan Doyle. Watson's literary agent, whatever. But anyway, that they're real. So I thought it would be quite fun just to kind of go along with the sort of conceit or the gag that this is another one of the originals. And I mean, nobody's being fooled obviously by this, but it's part of the entertainment of it is that you set the scene as this being that. And so it actually happened that I was doing research at the Wellcome Library. That part is actually true. Wellcome Library is this wonderful resource for historical medical stuff in London here, and I had pulled out a treatise on the use of cocaine because I wanted to really understand, what it was thought, how it was delivered, basically, and how it was thought about and what was prescribed for at that time. So I had one, one of the time I was reading it, and I thought, what if
he just came across
tied
it
on the back of this? These pages were kind of folded up and tied onto the back. It would have been rather thick, being a novel, but I actually was handling papers of this era. They will bring them to you at the you sit there and look through these wonderful historic documents. But going back to the other thing you said, Conan Doyle himself was he delighted in all the modern things of his time. So he read avidly and pursued, so all through the original canon of Sherlock Holmes, there's really leading cutting edge science, that comes up. Fingerprints weren't at the early part of Holmes and Watson in the 1880s. Fingerprints were still not allowed as courtroom evidence. They were not, but I mean, people knew about them. But also there wasn't, a big file of them where you could go see if they matched somebody. So you had to actually have the perpetrator in hand and then check, what I'm saying? And even then it wasn't considered proof exactly. So, but he was on top of all this stuff, and he was kind of ahead of the game. And one of the things that's delightful in reading the originals is that they kind of hint at or open the door to like a million other things, like you said, like forensics, but also just philosophy and music and the tone of the day. I mean, Conan Doyle was very tapped into what was going on. He was a very kind of hip happening guy of his time. And so it's really a delight. And it was such an exciting time in science and art. The 1880s, 1890s, when the stories first began, and it was just a really thrilling time, but also it was a very poignant time. It was sort of the decline of the empire, and so forth. And I feel like it's really oddly, it's very parallel to our own times, because we have technology which has just massively changed our lives, just as trains and electricity changed their lives, and some of the other steam and all those inventions. So, but we have technology changing our lives, and for me, I feel like it's somewhat the decline of, the American civilization. I just feel like really, but I feel like it's rather related. It's rather related to, the big tumult at the end of the 19th century. It's the big tumult at the end of, the 20th century and going into the head of the 21st. It's not dissimilar in a lot of ways.
Well, again, I think the when you say the kind of modern day, the BBC's modernization of it. I mean, I'll be honest, I was deeply suspicious of that when they first announced it and it started. I was kind of sat there with my arms folded, like, right, okay, you need to really impress me to get me to like this. And within about 5 minutes, I was completely with it. I thought, this is absolutely brilliant. I could not believe it. But then when I thought about it, as you say, there's so many parallels, even in the story, with Watson coming back from, Afghanistan, as it was, which is in the original stories and things like that.
Yes.
And, they just shift it becomes a blog that he's writing and all these different things. And it just seems to fit so well and transfer so well, which kind of, as you say, just kind of intimate that he was kind of a modern thinking
Yeah, he
man
really
anyway.
was, and but he was tied into the sort of the zeitgeist of his time. I mean, very much so. But yeah, I'm totally with you on that. I had the same kind of arms crossed, like, yeah, show me.
I just thought they were going to ruin it. I really did. I thought this is a bad idea.
Yeah, me too. I totally did, and I remember the exact moment I bought in, and I was already liking it. You know, the way they set it up is basically being through Watson's eyes. They first introduced him and his being alone in that hotel room and really kind of devastated and messed up poor guy, and then meeting this total weirdo. And then the moment they got me though was when Sherlock is asked to go out to go out to Brixton and investigate this latest in the string of murders. And he says, so you're an army doctor and you've seen lots of, injuries and horrible things. He goes, yes. And he goes, want to see some more? And he's like, yeah. It's like that moment. That is the moment, and it's like, okay.
It is. And again, it's really true to the original story, isn't it? I mean, it's more or less exactly the same.
Yeah. And a lot of the adaptations sort of missed out on who the original Watson was. The original Watson was an army man, was a crack shot, a sort of a ladies who was kind of addicted to adrenaline and adventure, and he was bored to death if he didn't have it. So that moment in BBC Sherlock when Mycroft calls him on it and says, you're not what is something like, you're not damaged by the war, you miss it, or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I mean, that is very true to the original concept of Watson. They didn't say it so boldly or on the page, but it was very much who the man was.
Because
it was wonderful, Watson, I thought.
Yeah, because I'm like you. I really like the Basil Rathbone films as well, but I hated the Watson in that. It was basically just a bumbling oaf. I mean, it was almost like just a comic foil, really. Yeah, and that's not the way he is in the original. But on the other hand, there is plenty of humor in the original, so that's something that a lot of emulators, I think, miss out, is that the sarcasm and cynicism of Holmes himself.
Yeah, but I mean, he's got kindness underneath that, though. But yes, he can be biting, but he's funny. And I think the friends, they're such deep friends that they can kind of goad each other, and it's it's enjoyable.
Well, I think there's a thing. I forget which story it's in. I think it's one of the early stories, and I think Watson's written an article or something, or there's an article on the table, and that's it. There's an article on the table, and he kind of rips it apart, Watson does, and then he discovers that Holmes has written it, and it's the way that it's done is he's kind of, and he's kind of embarrassed that he's just ripped it to shreds, and Sherlock Holmes lets him do it for sport, basically.
Right. Yes. Right.
Yeah, there's lots of humor in it,
and also, I think Watson kind of curbs Holmes's unsociability, or his he's a little bit what we would call Asperger's now, and he's a little bit what we maybe call bipolar as well, and Watson kind of keeps him in check. I loved in the modern BBC where he says, Holmes does something and he realizes it's like not socially quite acceptable, and he says, "Is this not good?" And Watson says, "It's a bit not good." Something like that. Just love that, because that, even though the language is so completely different from the original, that kind of interaction did in fact go on, and
it's so true to the original. Yeah. Well, did you, when you stepped into the, obviously you started doing it out of a pure love of it, obviously, and you loved doing it when you were writing it. As it got closer to publication, or maybe even when you were writing it, I don't know, but did you feel any pressure stepping into such a popular and well-loved fictional universe?
Well, I felt some nervousness because I really wanted it to be liked by people who really know the original stuff very well. I wanted it to, so I would call, Americans call them Sherlockians, or I should say us, because I'm one, and British call us Holmesians, but the same thing. And then there was people who are really steeped in the stuff. I hoped I wanted, and I had some trepidation, wanted that people that really know the stuff would also appreciate it. And yet I didn't want to just be writing for them, because I didn't want you to have read all the canon in order to love this. Because to me, you can take any of the stories and read them. I mean, there's a lot of doors to enter. But I wanted it to also work for what I call the deep Sherlockians. So I was, my nervousness was there. And then the other aspect was like, I really, like I said, I don't know that it's that commercial. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of people now have thrown their hat into this ring. And there are quite a few that have been put out that aren't so great, that aren't done carefully, I guess would be the way to say it. And so, I hope that people who haven't read any Sherlock at all would read the originals. So one of my reviewers, and this is my favorite review, I think, said that that my book Art and the Blood worked both for somebody who knew Conan Doyle inside out and wanted more, loved it, and it would also work as a gateway drug for those who hadn't.
That's a great way of describing it, yeah.
So it'll be a gateway drug. So if you read this and then you go, oh, maybe I should read the originals, you won't feel out of place at all. Like it would be a smooth transition. So I thought that I guess that person sort of specified like what I was actually trying to do. What I would, in other words, the reaction I was hoping for from readers.
Yeah, so you knew you'd landed it, sort of thing.
Yeah, and I don't think that's so. My whole thought as a writer is really about my readers, and about in terms of success or whatever. That's just out of my hands. That has nothing to do with me. All I can do is create the thing I love, and then hope that it lands with other people.
That's the best way. Yeah, write for yourself first.
You have to.
Absolutely. And what about the sort of, because the thing, again, I'm kind of completely naive to be honest, is what are the practical considerations when writing sort of new fiction that's based on existing intellectual property? Is there some kind of licensing involved, or because of the age of it, does that not matter? Do you have to get permission from anybody? How does that work?
It works differently for different, franchises, I guess. Arthur Conan Doyle's works, Sherlock Holmes is entirely in the public domain everywhere except the United States. And in the United States, all but the last 12 stories are in public domain. So,
right.
So that means anybody can write Sherlock Holmes. In the United States, you can't write something that appears only in the last 12 stories. But the rest of the stuff is free to use. One of the constraints I set upon myself, though, was I have read other pastiches, and I stopped reading them, of course, when I started writing them, because I didn't want to dilute the voice, I guess, that's in my head. I only stayed with reading Conan Doyle. But one of the constraints I set for myself was I didn't want to reuse or recycle any of the deductions that are in the originals. And that's something that a lot of pastiches
That's a big challenge.
do. So I wanted to create something that is very much like them, but all new. So that was kind of a little rule I set for myself. But and various other things like that. But that made it kind of more fun. It's like made it more of a puzzle.
Well, I was going to ask you that. I mean, because it seems to me to be a very difficult, puzzle to set yourself, because you are essentially saying you can create these puzzles for I know he's fictional, but one of the greatest kind of detective minds that we've kind of ever known, kind of thing. How did you find that? Was that must have taken quite a lot of plotting and kind of thought power, I would have thought.
Each of the two books took me 2 years to write, and I wish they'd taken me less time, but they did take me a long time. There was an interview with Moffat and Gatiss about BBC Sherlock, and they said, "What's the hardest thing about writing them?" They said, "The deductions." Oh my god.
yeah, completely, yeah.
That is really the hard one, because he's supposed to be the smartest man in the world, and I'm not right. I've figured this thing out. But of course I have time. I have time and research and on my side.
Yeah.
But you work backwards basically. And like he might decide that well, I don't want to spoil this because you haven't finished this book, but at one point he's dealing with a doctor and a nurse, married couple, and he wants to figure out something about the woman before her own husband does. And so I kind of had in my head what it was, but then I thought, okay, what would be the signs that her husband, who's a doctor, would not pick up, but he would? And then I did some research about what were some of the remedies for this particular thing at that time, and I found one. I was like, yes, that's the one. So in other words, I had to work backwards, and I have the benefit, as I said, of research and time to do this. But yeah, it is challenging. The other thing about these books is that Conan Doyle wrote short stories and novellas, and these are novels, and so in order to take Sherlock Holmes and stay true to the format in a way, but yet make it be a longer format, then he's the smartest man in the world. It better be a really damn complicated problem for him to solve. Otherwise, he's done by page 30, and then what do you do? So the way I approached that was I decided that there would be kind of more than one case involved, or more than one mystery. But in order to not make it just feel episodic, like, oh, he's finished with that one and now we take a breath and now he does another one, that would just feel like concatenated short stories. I realized in order to make it feel like a long form, that these three had to kind of be woven together like a triple helix, and they basically have to be tied together, and then that makes it more complicated. But that would make it more complicated for him, which you need in order to suspend the belief, that he is, he hasn't come to the bottom of it yet. So that was the other thought behind these.
So it's what makes it so complicated in the first place. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your the most recent book that you've got coming, which or is it out yet? The Devil's Due.
Well, the second book is called Unquiet Spirits, and that one has come out this year. And that one is about. Do you want to hear about that one, or do you want to hear the one that? Tell me about both. Yeah. Okay. Well, so the first one is Art in the Blood, and it has to do. I have to say that I have. I choose themes for these books, which is a little unusual in the mystery genre, but it helps me formulate the overarching plot. So the first one, Art in the Blood, was the subtext was about what are the blessings and curses of an artistic temperament, which Holmes definitely has. The gifts, of course, are you see things that other people don't see, and you see patterns. You have high sensitivity, you a lot more perception of a lot of things. But the downside, of course, is you have this sort of emotional vulnerability, perhaps moodiness, and so forth. The second one, Unquiet Spirits, has to do with whiskey, those spirits, but it also has to do with ghosts, like really a haunted castle, but ghosts in two ways. What about ghosts of our past? And then, in fact, the book starts with an argument between Holmes and Watson about Watson saying, we are haunted by ghosts of our past, things we didn't do or people we could have helped, or things that went wrong, and these things that are just kind of hovering in our mind and bothering us, and they're just unfulfilled, or they're unsolved, whatever. And Holmes scoffs at that and says, we can control our, we have control of our own mind better than that, come on. Yeah. But this premise is like, what if there are unresolved ghosts of your past? And of course there does turn out to be one in Holmes's past. So that, and I wanted to hook that into the crimes that are actually going on present day. So that was my challenge for book 2, was this, tying in Holmes's past with the current set of murders and hauntings or whatever, and whether ghosts are real. Of course, in Scotland, many people, maybe most people, in fact, believe in some form of ghosts. Every castle in Scotland is haunted. Anyway, and it has to do with the whiskey business as well, which has a lot of lore surrounding it. So that one was kind of about the ghosts of our past. Now, the third one I'm just working on now. It's called The Devil's Due, and This has to do with, the sort of the deals we make, or the trade-offs we make to be successful, to be the top in our field, to be the best we can be. And Holmes is
a bit Faustian.
Yeah, a little bit Faustian. And yes. And so as you know, or Goethe is quoted quite a bit in Sherlock Holmes, and in fact, at one point, Holmes says, "Goethe, always pithy," so which is kind of fun. So that little bit of that is coming in as sort of an under subtext, I guess would be the way to say it, to this story.
That's great. And have you had any sort of traditionalists, if you like, are they kind of resistant to the idea of any new stories being added to the Holmes canon?
I haven't had any really vocal objections. I have, I think super traditionalists just don't read any. They don't read any pastiche because they just don't even give it a chance. I have had a number of very, very intense, shall we say, very educated, very smart Sherlockians, Holmesians like the book. So I've been very gratified that a number of people who are really into it did not disdain it, which they could very easily have done. I was really worried about that, but it has gained general acceptance. There's always somebody. I mean, typically though, you got to think that it's just something that you do your best, and people either take it for what it is and enjoy it, or they can pick it apart. And
yeah, sure, actually, that's with any art, isn't it?
Yeah, and I have had less of that than I expected, because the Sherlockians are a picky lot. I'm one. Frankly, if I start reading one and the language is wrong, or they put modern language in, or they have just stupid things in there that are just period wrong, or they have Watson Bede, not Watson. I don't know. I mean, if they are not getting the characters and the setting and the language and the pacing and the humor, if they're not, it's very apparent quite quickly. So, there's maybe more hurdles for pleasing Sherlockians than there might otherwise be. But on the other hand, it's just, Conan Doyle is so readable even now. The original stuff is so readable that an emulation, when done well, is also really readable, because it's just, he's so good. I mean, he is just really a great writer. So I haven't had the picky, angry reactions that I feared, which is good.
It is good. Yeah. So let's just scoot back a little bit then. So why don't you just tell us how you came to writing in the first place? When did you realise you wanted to write? And how did you come to find yourself working for Universal and eventually writing the original story for Tron? That's a lot of questions, I know. But
well, I wanted to write since I was a kid, and I remember in high school trying to articulate that to myself, what exactly I wanted to do, and I wanted to write great, entertaining stories that had some meat in them, that had some positive message to the world, and yet I don't mean sickly sweet positive messages, but just have they're a form of entertainment, but that has something positive to them. And when I was in high school, I read a book called The Making of Star Trek by Gene Roddenberry, and he was a former cop, and as such, had a pretty bleak view of humanity. But he was an idealist, and he had this vision of what humanity could be. And he conceived this show, this Star Trek, the original Star Trek, as, kind of dramatizing a kind of an idealized society with, very multicultural, exploring, very scientific, very, going to, explore new places, but not do any harm to them, etc. You know, had this kind of lovely vision, which seems sometimes quaint to us now, but was really well articulated. And of course, it became, a very popular franchise. It's still going on.
I think I've heard of that.
We're talking, this is like 50, almost going on 60 years later now. So anyway, I read this thing and I remember thinking, and again, I had really loved Star Trek, the original series. I remember being very taken by it, and also immediately knowing that Spock is Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the logic. Yeah,
they're cousins or something. I just got very excited about it. There's a big crossover, by the way, fans of Sherlock Holmes and fans of Star Trek. There's quite a big overlap there for this reason, because they're both idealistic. They're both about, the
triumph of science over adversity.
Rational thinking. And yet, with touches of emotion that have to balance and make things really work. And, they're not like pure rationality. They're because the Kirk character, of course, and all the other characters other than Spock, bring in different aspects of humanity that need to be there to be fully human. And so I think, so at that time I kind of formulated in my head I wanted to write something that that meant something, but that was also really, really fun to watch. And so anyway, I did in university. I then did music as an undergrad, and I did film as a graduate student, and with my goal to write and produce. And I got a job at Universal in the story department, almost right out of college. A couple jobs in between, but pretty close to right out of college. And I rose through the ranks there, and I became a story editor in feature films. So what I did was I read all the drafts of all the scripts that were in development at the studio, and then I would write notes on them, just basically the way a book editor functions, only for screenplays. I did this for 4 years, and then I left to be a writer, and I wrote Tron. I wrote the original drafts of Tron. I wrote, a couple screenplays, 3 or 4 screenplays maybe, and maybe 14 treatments. Anyway, my last screenplay was the one that sold to Disney. But then I left that project, and there were 8 sets of writers after me. So the actual Tron that came out has not one word of my dialogue in it. and I was not very pleased, because the original script had a lot of science underlaying it, because I did a tremendous amount of research. I went up to what was, but was not yet, was going to be Silicon Valley. I met some scientists there, and I really laid in sort of this. I created a science fiction world that was based on what was actually inside of a computer, and then there's a lot of humor, because I actually originally wrote that movie for Robin Williams. He was going to be the guy that fell in, so it was very funny. He was very funny. That character was very funny. Unfortunately, Jeff got excised. Jeff Bridges was cast. He actually ad-libbed some back in because he's a very gifted man, and he just got that, guy falling in a computer, it should have some humor.
That's quite funny.
Let's face it, it should be funny. So anyway, while I wasn't happy with the ultimate writing of that movie, I still know that, some of the bare bones were there, and I also thought the visuals were groundbreaking, and the music and lots of things were very good. Jeff Bridges was great. So I did that, and then I wrote a few more scripts and sold them to various movie stars and studios, but they weren't made. And then I got tired of that. That's a very typical story in Hollywood. So I made a good living, but I was frustrated artistically. So I formed a production company, and for about 10 years, I did a lot of documentaries, some scripted, but mostly documentary films, and got some Emmys for those. And that was pleasing, although it's a different kind of writing documentaries, kind of work. And then I got tired of that, and then I was an actor for 10 years. And that was great fun. And then after that, I also started teaching screenwriting at that time. I teach screenwriting at UCLA Extension, even now. And I just all of a sudden decided to write a novel.
That's kind of how you got into it. Okay, let's take a quick break there to bring you this week's Book Bloggers Corner. Today, Catherine Sunderland, aka Bibliomaniac, is reviewing Anatomy of a Scandal by Sarah Vaughan. As you'll hear, so dedicated is Catherine that she actually battled through a nasty cold to bring you this review, so be sure to go and read Catherine's other reviews at bibliomaniacuk.blogspot.co.uk.
This is the BBC Book Bloggers Corner.
I'm going to talk about Anatomy of a Scandal by Sarah Vaughan. This is a really intelligent thriller which not only blends the genre of a court case drama with domestic thriller, but also includes many passages of exquisite writing about marriage, friendship, love and moral dilemmas. It is compelling and absorbing, thought-provoking and evocative, chilling and desperately unputdownable. Anatomy of a Scandal is about Sophie and her husband James. James is a junior minister and a close friend of the Prime Minister, and he's on trial accused of a terrible crime. However, it feels there's another crime being tried in the court case against James, the crime of a sense of entitlement, privilege and arrogance. In this articulate, accomplished domestic thriller, Vaughan cleverly creates a trial where the perpetrator is not only being tried for his physical actions, but also for his social status, past behaviour and self-absorption. His self-assurance and wealthy background has led him to believe he can behave recklessly without any thought for the long-term consequences or the effect of his behaviour might have on those he claims to love. This is a fascinating novel that, although driven by the drama of a nail-biting court case, also takes time to develop complex characters whose layers are slowly pulled back, revealing more hidden connections, entwined loyalties, and the subsequent repercussions of shared histories, secrets and lies. At nearly 400 pages, Vaughan has allowed herself time and space to really develop and consider the roles of each character in the events leading up to the crime for which James stands trial. We slip between the past and the present and hear from both Sophie, James's wife, and Kate, the barrister. The tension is taut throughout as we sit in the court one moment, join Sophie at home the next, watch Kate in her office, and then delve further back to the days when all three characters were at university discovering who they were, making friends and allegiances that would bind them to their future and shape the course of who or what they then became. Ultimately, Anatomy of a Scandal is an exceedingly good story. It has engaging characters, some likeable, some not so much, some with little redemption at all, but each one carefully crafted to drive the dramatic and emotional tension. There's been some really powerful TV series like The Good Wife and Apple Tree Yard, which explore similar themes like Anatomy of a Scandal, and I think that this novel will capture the imaginations and the interest of all the readers in 2018 and perhaps be one of the most exciting books published next year.
Book Bloggers Corner.
Yes, that was Anatomy of a Scandal by Sarah Vaughan, as reviewed by Catherine Sunderland. And by next year, Catherine, of course, means this year, as she recorded that back in 2017. Thanks again, Catherine, and I hope you're feeling better soon. Let's get back to our interview with Bonnie Macbird. Bonnie spent several years as a script editor, reviewing and critiquing spec scripts for Universal. I asked her what some of the most common mistakes and problems she saw with those screenplays and treatments.
Working as an editor and reading that much material is probably the best training you could have as a writer. Just as a note, like the very first, when I left Universal and I became a writer, my first draft popped in at 110 pages because I had embodied screenplay structure.
You just knew the structure, yeah.
So much work. Yeah, it just was in me. So I learned, to answer that original question, all that reading helped me understand, and because screenplays are so highly structured, it helped me understand story structure. It also helped me understand character and the shorthand of character, the way you can create a character on the page in just basically the equivalent of a few brushstrokes. Just the end, how they walk onto the page, and the first thing they say or do, or the situation you thrust them into the first moment you see them, can give you so much information about that person. And then there are, I wouldn't call them tricks because that cheapens it, but there are aspects of character that make you care about them. And there are writers who are just so genius at this, and writers who cannot get this to save their lives. But it is the essence of good writing that you care about the character. That doesn't mean they have to be like sweet and nice, because you can care intensely about some derelict, drunken ex-con, anything, if it's written well. And there are ways to make the reader care. And otherwise, in a novel, you just won't turn the page. You know, if it's on Netflix, you won't watch the end of the movie. It's just there's something you have to hook that person into, like caring.
Well, it's like this. Yeah, it's like the save the cat kind of mentality, isn't it? That's kind of what he talks about in that. I mean, it's like why we, we tune in, or we did tune in week after week to see like Tony Soprano. So, for example, who on the face of it is, a horrible. Yeah, despicable man, and yet we still sort of sympathise with him in some way, shape, or form, or at least want to find out, what happens to him the next week, and what's wrong with him, and how we can fix him and things. Yes,
I mean, and you look at House, for example, with Hugh Laurie. He was a pretty rude, rather mean man, and yet he was, a suffering person who was basically saving people's lives. And he's actually, of course, based on Sherlock Holmes, that character.
I was just going to say that,
yeah. But I mean, yes, so there are these things that you do that, as a writer, that just, and then beyond that, there are structural things there's something called narrative drive that is extremely hard to pinpoint or say what it is, but you can certainly tell when it's not there. And that is the thing that makes you just turn the page. So, if you're a jaded studio exec sitting in an office and you've got 15 scripts in front of you that you have to cover that night, and you go like, oh man, and you pick one up, and if a good one will just make you you can't put it down. And that's narrative drive. And after reading, more than 1,000 scripts in my 4 years, it was really helpful because I started to really embody and understand what that means. What is narrative drive? And it's not always like a mystery. Sometimes it's a mystery. Sometimes it's just a little surprise. Sometimes a little hint. Sometimes it's a little discovery that just changes that character. Now they were heading due north, and now they're going northeast. Just something was like, whoa, something happened here, and there's
a gear change.
Kinds of little ways to do that, and so that is another key to good writing. So I basically picked up a lot of. And I learned this as much from the bad scripts as from the good ones, because the bad ones, just like, why are they bad? Like, why am I so bored?
It's often more obvious, isn't it?
Yeah, because some of it would have the formula down, and they've said that here's the latest Harrison Ford movie, and here it is. Of course he became a star while I was there, but So it's just kind of like. Yeah, but it doesn't have something. There's something else missing.
The passive protagonist is quite a big mistake that you see, isn't it? Quite a lot with scripts. Just having stuff happen to them, rather than having any sense of agency. Yeah, exactly.
It's like they're just kind of a little ball in a what do you call it? A pachinko machine or something, and they're just being rattled around the story there.
Yeah,
but passive and or unlikable in some key way, and it's not always the obvious way, because like I said, you don't necessarily have to have a lovable hero or heroine. You just have to have somebody you can relate to and that you care about. And like I said, it doesn't have to be overtly nice, but you're right, if they're passive, you kind of lose interest. you can just completely lose interest in them. So that's a huge issue.
Yeah, I mean, somebody being just very, very good at what they do is a really good way to hook people, isn't it? Which again brings us back to Sherlock, and I mean, he kind of ticks all the boxes, really, isn't he? Because he's very, very, very good at what he does. Yeah, he's damaged, he's flawed in lots of ways as well, which makes him more interesting.
Exactly, he is damaged, and I mean, he has that Achilles heel. He's sort of first superhero in a way, because he does have these almost superpowers that are astonishing to others. And then he does have that Achilles heel. He has he gets depressed. He drugs himself. He also gets sort of manic too. The other thing is it's sort of understated in the canon, but is definitely there. So like in one of the stories that Conan Doyle wrote, it starts out with Watson having to travel to the south of France because Holmes has collapsed in a hotel down there after a case. So, I mean, he works to exhaustion. And so, I mean, there's these other things about him. He is lonely. What's the deal with him and women? It's like he's a lonely man, and, you feel for him. So that makes a lot of Sherlockians talk about this aspect of Holmes, and I think it's a powerful one, and that is there are holes in the character. There's stuff you don't know about him, and you kind of end up filling it in with yourself, you, the reader. And so I'm like him in this way, or he's like me in this way, and you get a kind of a more you feel closer to this character.
He's almost like a cipher because you can just almost project lots of other stuff onto him, as you say.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
That's probably why he works across so many different adaptations and so many different time periods as well, over the adaptations.
I think so, yeah. I really do. I mean, it's interesting, so I thought Robert Downey Jr. was a very good Holmes, and he doesn't really look like the description in the book, but it doesn't matter. He embodied so much of that, of the person, in a really wonderful way. So I thought he was fantastic as well.
Yeah, he's a great actor. I wasn't as keen on those films, but I do really like Robert Downey Jr. Yeah. I agree. He's a great actor.
I like the first film better than the second, but yeah. Yeah.
So what about for you then, as we kind of round things up? So in terms of what's next, have you got any plans to write any non-Sherlock novels? And if you do you think you'll find it difficult to shake off the voice of Dr. Watson when you do?
Oh, gee, I don't know. I hope not. I'm so enjoying, wearing the bowler hat or whatever. Being Dr. Watson on the page is quite fun. Actually, I have some ideas for other kind of. I have an idea for a non-period mystery. I like mysteries a lot. They appeal to me because they're intellectually challenging to construct, but also because they, unlike real life, they set the world aright.
They can have a nice, neat solution. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's satisfying in that respect, and I think that's one of the reasons we love Holmes right now, especially as this rational voice and this ability to set things right, none of which seems to be apparent in the real world right now. So,
no, I agree.
But I think, probably just I have some present day mysteries, and I also have in mind I'd like to do a children's book as well. I like to illustrate something. I did illustrations, by the way, for the first book. And they are up on my website. And there was a special edition of it done by the Mysterious Press in New York. With those,
brilliant.
I did them in the style of Sidney Paget. And I hired, in the same way that he did, he hired his friends and he took photographs. Of course, they didn't have to rent costumes because he was.
They just wore what they had on. Yeah. I saw you actually. I did see those. I saw the photographs actually that you're referring to with a couple of your actor friends.
Yeah. I have a few, and I took some. I actually haven't posted the ones I've painted off of, but the paintings are up on my website. And then I just took a slew of photographs when I was in LA recently of my friends again for book 2. So I'll probably do a series of paintings from that as well. And I must say I had so much fun. I have a lot of actor friends from my theater days, and I have a couple in particular that are perfect Holmes and Watson.
That's brilliant. Well, on that subject, as we kind of wrap things up then, why don't you tell people what your website is and where they can find you online, on Twitter and everything else?
Well, thank you very much. My website is my last name, so it's www.macbird, MACBIRD, just like a bird.com. And my Twitter is @Macbird, and you'll find me there.
Brilliant. Well, I'll put that in the show notes as well. But it's been such fun to talk to you. It's been really, really interesting. So for now, I know you're going to hang around briefly for the little epilogue bonus question. But for now, Bonnie Macbird, thanks very much.
Thank you.
There you go. I hope you enjoyed that interview, and thanks again to Bonnie for taking the time to chat to me. You should definitely check out her books, whether you're new to reading Sherlock Holmes or not. Bonnie will return for next week's Quick Listen epilogue show, where she gives her screenwriting tips for us novelists. That wraps things up for this week, but don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever else you grab your podcasts, and do leave us a review. It takes seconds and helps others to find the show. Speaking of finding us, you can do that at joinedupwriting.co.uk, where you can find our entire back catalogue of episodes. You can also tweet us at JU Podcast and follow us on Facebook. You can also tweet me directly at Mr. Kelly2U, and I would love to hear what you enjoy about the show or any other ideas you have to help me improve things. So, thanks again for listening to the Joined Up Writing Podcast. Let's get joined up. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy reading and writing, and I'll see you next time.
Joined up writing.